Hey guys, we got a lot. We're going to move fast today, so I'm going to talk faster than normal. And we are going to review very, very briefly. There's a new book came out a couple of weeks ago by a lady named Kara Powell. The 3 questions every teenager asks. She and her team of researchers interviewed 2,000 teenagers here in 2021, and their research produced these 3 questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? And what am I here for? Sound familiar? Yeah. Who am I? Identity. Where do I belong? Community. What am I here for? Purpose or mission. It is in all of us. And for us, a lot of those questions have been answered in the physical world. We have kind of established and defined, I'm not going to be an NBA star. That's not who I am. For a while there, I had aspirations, but then, turned out that's not who I am. But then where do I belong? And so found a life partner, children, church community, things like that. But identity, a community, and then mission. And obviously I have a job, but that's not my ultimate mission. It's making disciples. And so the Lord invites us all to have a part in that. But those things flow out of consecutive order there. And if we build that in the wrong order, it will implode on itself. And so we talked about our identity, that we are completely loved, totally included, fully forgiven, continually transformed, that we are part of a community, and therefore we love as we've been loved, that we accept as we've been accepted, that we encourage and stimulate to Christ-like living even as we have been continually transformed, and that we forgive even as we have been forgiven. And then our mission, we've looked at the 2-headed duck. We looked at that we are both to demonstrate and to proclaim. And then we last couple of weeks, we looked at first century evangelism model of listening, loving, and then leading people to the Savior. So today we're going to get very, very practical. In the first couple of minutes here, I want to talk about how do you share your testimony in the 21st century in a way that engages with non-believers or potential non-believers and invites the spiritual conversation to continue. So historically, we've often taught sharing our testimony as my life before Christ, here's the gospel, my life after Christ. There's a nod like that's a familiar model. I'm going to suggest that that's not really the best way to engage non-believers in the 21st century. So I love stories. And if normally we do missionary training for Camps Outreach, this Tuesday night, we'll have 16 new CO missionaries that are in town for their pre-deployed training week, and they'll be over at our house for dinner. And inevitably, when dinner starts to wind down, one of them will say, hey, tell us a story about your time in China. And so I'll unpack a story or two and really love telling stories. Actually, all of us love stories to varying degrees. And part of that is because God has woven all of time is a story. And every story has 4 parts. And so I'm going to race through what I love to spend an hour talking about is the science of story. C.S. Lewis, who used to be one of the most well-known atheists in the world, actually became a follower of Jesus because stories have 4 parts. And he is a master storyteller. We know him from the Chronicles of Narnia, but obviously other books as well. He and J.R. Tolkien were best friends. They were out walking one day around Oxford. And Tolkien, of course, was a follower of Christ in the Catholic tradition. The Roman Catholic tradition was once again advocating for the existence of God, and Lewis was once again reminding him he didn't believe in God. And Tolkien said, well, you actually do. And Lewis says, no, I'm pretty sure I don't. And Tolkien said, no, you do, because the reason you love stories is because it resonates within your heart, the existence of the real story, the true story, the deep magic, as Lewis would later come to describe it in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And Lewis, in his testimony, his biography, would trace his conversion back to that moment and his acknowledgement that, yes, the fact that we love 4-part stories is because we live in a 4-part story. And so I'm going to tell you what those 4 parts are. Part number 1 is the setting. Every story has to have a setting, which involves 3 things: a time and a place and a hero. And so if you think of any good story, whether it's one that you've read, whether it's one that you've seen on the screen, be it in your hand or with hundreds of people in a theater, or whether it's been one that you've seen on Broadway or an opera, ballet, all of those stories have a setting, and it has to have a hero, somebody that you care about and emotionally connect with, and they want something. And so in the course of the setting, the artist, the writer, the storyteller creates an emotional connection between you and the hero and what they want. Could be a father who loves his daughter. It could be a woman who loves a man and she's not paying attention to him. It could be somebody going out shopping. I mean, there's not a great story. There's just a lot of ways, and we all know good stories and bad stories. So, and then it has to be a time. You've got to know where it's taking, when it's taking place, and then there's got to be a location. So some of the famous settings you might be familiar with, long, long ago, in the galaxy, far, far away. That's right. And then the two sons of Tatooine, and then he comes up, and then there's Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. And boom, right off the bat, within seconds, you've got the time, you've got the place, and then you come to know who the hero is and what he wants. Once upon a time, so that gives you a vague idea, but then they'll tell you there were 3 little pigs. That's right. And they all built houses, and basically they just wanted to be left alone and live in peace. So that's what they wanted. Could be once upon a time there was a beautiful princess, and inevitably her parents are dead. So and then it goes on from there. What does she want? Obviously she wants to be married. That's the natural result of not having your parents. Anyway, it's not great storytelling, but that's the setting. From the setting, the second part of the story is the conflict. There has to be a conflict. That's the introduction of a villain, an enemy, someone, an obstacle that is keeping the hero from reaching their goal or getting what they want. So Darth Vader in Star Wars, or usually some type of witch in the princess dramas. It could be the evil corporation in some of them. It could be a health issue. It could be a kidnapping in the case of the father who loves his daughter. And so something is coming between. Now, if you've ever seen the Pixar movie Up, one of the greatest examples of setting, in the beginning of the story, you have the little boy, and over the course of 5 minutes with almost no dialogue, he falls in love with the little girl. They end up getting married. They both want to go to the falls. They begin saving money, and of course they lose the money, and then they save some more money, and they lose the money because life happens, and then she ends up passing away from illness, and you have this emotional connection with him. And then the evil corporation comes in, and they want to take his house away and destroy his, never going to reach his dream of visiting the falls. Or it could be the evil stepmother who decides to take Snow White out into the woods and have a hired help kill her, cut her heart out and put it in a box because it's fun for the whole family. What in the world, Disney? So you've got this conflict going on. Conflict is crucial in a story. If you don't have conflict, it's just a news report. Conflict creates this moment where the hero is a wanderer. They were heading in a direction. There's something that they wanted, and like the movie Taken, where the bad guys kidnap the daughter, the father then has to decide: is he just going to let it happen, or is he going to do something about it? Is he going to call the police? Is he going to call Interpol? Is he going to pick up the phone and call the bad guys and explain that he has a special set of skills, and when he finds them, he will kill them? But we call this, he's a wanderer. There's a maze of options available to the hero, and he's trying to decide what path he's going to take to pursue that goal. And then you reach the third part of the story. The third part of the story is the rescue. This is where the hero moves from being a wanderer to being a warrior. The path is chosen, the direction is set. He gets in the starfighter and he decides he's going to go in and shoot the photon down the exhaust tube and blow up the Death Star, or he's going to puff and blow the house down. No. Actually, we're going to let him crawl down the chimney and into the boiling pot, or we're going to go and push the stepmom off the cliff. When the Seven Dwarfs did that. But there's a matter of the rescue. Now here's the deal with the rescue. The greater the cost to the hero, the greater the sacrifice of the hero, the greater the rescue. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the rescue. So the father, daughter is kidnapped. There's a request for ransom, and he decides he's not going to call the police. He's going to pay the ransom. He's going to get the daughter back. And you find out that the ransom is $1.25. Great story? Not so much. $1.25, it's not a big sacrifice. You find out it's $1 million ransom that he's going to pay. Okay, then that's a greater sacrifice. And then you find out the father's Bill Gates. Well, that's more like $1.25. So context matters in the setting. Sorry, Zoom people, I know I keep blowing into the mic. I apologize for that. Move it down a little bit. And so the greater the sacrifice, the greater the rescue. What's the greatest sacrifice one can make? Yeah, risking death or death itself. And so when the sacrifice is at the risk of or at the cost of one's life, those are the stories that grip us. Those are the stories that draw us in, because the greater the sacrifice, the greater the rescue. Now, there's a fourth part to the story. I have to tell you, Chinese stories end at 3 parts. Almost all Asian stories actually do. Part of it is because of the circular reincarnation, repetition of life mantra. And so the way it was at the beginning is the way it is at the end. And so you get back to the rescue and things go back to the way that they were. Every time that Disney or other Hollywood filmmakers have made a 3-part story and have screened it with an audience, the audience has universally panned it, Western audiences anyway. Because what's the point of the sacrifice is all it does is just reset back to the beginning. It wasn't worth the sacrifice. It should be better at the end than it was at the beginning if you're going to sacrifice that much. And so that is the fourth part of the story. We often call it the, what is it? No, it's not the climax. It's the, no, I forgot. I don't have my notes in front of me. Yeah, okay. We'll go with resolution for now. But it's better at the end than it was at the beginning. So for example, restoration, there you go. Setting, oh, I do have the notes. Look there, rescue, restoration. There we go, restoration. Good for me. I planned ahead better than I thought I did. I'm so anxious about time that I'm out of my flow. Things are better at the end than they were at the beginning. It was worth the sacrifice. Here's the deal. If good hasn't won, the story's not over yet. That's a biblical truth. That's why we don't fear death as followers of Jesus. If death is the end, then what's the point? But death is not the end. There is eternal life that has already begun that extends beyond death. Good always wins in the end. Therefore, we do not grieve as non-believers. As Dr. Reeder reminded us this morning, actually, I think it was John in his transition from the special music to the corporate singing. The kind of king that we follow holds the keys of death and hell and the grave. And so good always wins. Let me give you 2 cultural examples. Of course, you know the story of Sleeping Beauty. Her name was Aurora. She was a princess. She was cursed by Maleficent. Strange story. She was able to curse her to die, but then one of the fairies still had her wish. So she was able to cancel. You couldn't die, but you still have to fall asleep. But we're going to make everybody fall asleep. Thanks for that. It was just one person. Now all of us have to sleep for no good reason. Anyway, she does prick her finger after 315 years and 364 days. We keep her safe. And then the last day we don't watch. And she sneaks up into the attic, pricks her finger on the spinning wheel. She falls asleep. Philip shows up. Philip, you know why Philip's not asleep? Plot hole. No, he's from another kingdom, so it was only that kingdom. So Philip shows up, battles Maleficent, who somehow turns into a dragon, but at great risk to himself, he kills Maleficent in the rescue, and things are better at the end than the beginning. She was single, now she's married. She was a princess, now she's a queen, and they live happily ever after. 4-part story. Let's use a different one. The greatest book written in the 20th century, Lord of the Rings. It's been out for 75 years as a book. There are no spoiler alerts at this point. If you haven't read it or seen the movie, shame on you. So it starts in the Shire. You've got the hobbits, and everybody's happy. And I should know half of you better than I know most of you, and most of you more than I look like all of you. And you remember the Bilbo's birthday party. But it turns out that evil is encroaching, and even in the Shire, where it feels like there's no danger, say Birmingham, Alabama, you know, the danger is encroaching all around. And at some point, they're going to be destroyed if the power of the ring is not broken. And Frodo says, I'm happy to destroy the ring. I don't know where Mordor is, but if you help me get there, I'm happy to take it. And so the fellowship is formed at great risk to himself, even to the point of almost death and the loss of a finger. The ring is destroyed and he wakes up in the Elven land. And the one line, the main line of the book that Jackson screwed up and did not include in the movie, the take home quote of the entire story is when they wake up in the Elven land. And Samwise Gamgee wakes up, and when he wakes, he sees Gandalf the White standing at the foot of his bed. And he says, "Oh, Mr. Gandalf, sir, you're alive." But they haven't seen him since he fell down into the ravine with the Balrog. And we thought you were dead. Actually, we thought we were dead. Then he says, "Is everything sad going to become untrue?" That's the point of the book. That's the point of the book. Guys, everything sad comes untrue. All the grief and pain and struggle in our life is something for which we will worship Jesus when we understand as he understands. If we had all the wisdom and knowledge of God, we would choose for our lives the very things he has brought to our life. But we can't now because we see with human eyes, with limited understanding. And so we worship him by faith in what one day we will worship him by sight. But it will not be the eradication or the removal of those things, for they were what formed us in our praise and glorification of him. It will come untrue. Jesus' scars are not gone. He still has his scars because what was sad has come untrue. It has become not something sad and bad, something glorious. We call it Good Friday as a down payment on everything sad coming untrue. Better at the end than it is at the beginning. And of course, those four-part stories are just echoes of the story. Because in the beginning, God created heavens and the earth. There's a time, there's a place, and there's a hero. It's not you, it's not me, it's God. God wanted something, not needed something, but he wanted something. He wanted us. He wanted a relationship with us. He wanted to know us and to be known by us. He loves us so much. But there's a problem, there's a conflict. We didn't want him. We wanted ourselves more than we wanted him. And so brokenness came into the world. Sin came into the world. Evil came into the world. Sickness came into the world. Because anything apart from God is doomed to failure. It's not flourishing. God didn't leave us in a conflict. Because the hero looked at all the options and said, I choose this path. And I will pay a great sacrifice to get what I want, which is those that I have made that I love. And so he sent his son in keeping the promise. And we have entered today into the season of Advent and the reminder that he kept his promise at great cost. The greatest sacrifice, his own life. And he died. But he didn't stay dead because there's a fourth part to the story. He came back and he is preparing a place for us. And it has not entered into our mind what it will be like in the fourth part of the story. The greatness makes living here like living in a garbage bin compared to what will be there when we are fully with him in all of his glory. We talk about at our house as lots of picnics, going out and having really, really great barbecue with Jesus. And all of you are welcome to come. In fact, that's the nice thing is we're not worried about time. And so there's no like, I got something else I got to do. Like, hey, we're going to go picnic with Jesus. You want to come? And everybody's like, yes. And so we're all going to go have picnic. And then we're going to tell Jesus about all the great things he did in our life. You remember that time? We're going to start talking about it. And in the middle of it, somebody's going to go, oh, wait, when was that? So when that was happening with you, this was happening with me. You're kidding. That's amazing. It's like somebody was organizing and was in charge of all of this. And there's like 1,000 people and nobody's worried about interrupting because there's plenty of time. And even in the middle of the story, Jesus is going to go, yeah, but wait. What you didn't know was, and he's going to tell us about another billion things that were happening, even as he was redeeming and working in our lives. It's going to be a great picnic. We're all going to love it so much. We're going to say, let's do it again tomorrow. It's a great heaven. It's a great restoration. It's a great fourth part of the story. Now, the reason I tell you all of that is in Acts chapter 22, Paul tells his personal story in 4 parts. And so I'm not going to go through it because of time, but I've given you the references. And if you want to go through it, I encourage you to read through 22 and look at the fact that he actually tells his setting, he gives the conflict, he talks about the rescue, and then he talks about the restoration. The fact that he's been given the responsibility and the privilege of bringing the gospel to the Gentiles as an apostle was one untimely born as his restoration. So I know you guys, and you will go and do that as you have time. I'm so sorry. And so the outline that I want to give you for your personal story is this. As you start talking with someone who may or may not know the Lord, and you're given the privilege of determining the topic or the conversation, one of the natural ways to do that is to start talking about your situation before you met Jesus. This doesn't have to be lengthy. The setting doesn't require tons and tons of detail. And in fact, sometimes too much detail gets you off on a rabbit trail or gets you bogged down in, oh, I remember that year, or I remember what was happening in my life at that point. What you're trying to do in the setting is build connections with the other person. The assumption would be that you've heard some of their story. And so as you begin to tell your story, you're looking to build bridges into connections with their story. And so you would share some of your situation before you met Christ in ways that would overlap with theirs. Number 2, what's the problem that you faced or a struggle that you met? Look, all of us came to know Jesus because he solved a problem for us. What was the problem? Now, this requires great vulnerability. This requires some transparency, some admission that we need a Savior. And sometimes our properness and our manners, we try to veil some of this. But I would suggest, especially as we engage with this younger generation who values authenticity as much, if not more, than some previous generations did, it's crucial that we talk about this struggle. Again, not in excessive detail, but that we acknowledge the reality of what it was that brought us to a place where we acknowledged our need of a rescue, our need of a Savior, our need of help. Number 3, how did Christ meet you in that problem? Now, what I'm not saying here is share the gospel. And not that I'm not for sharing the gospel, but the primary purpose of a testimony, I think, in the 21st century is actually to move the level of intimacy of the relationship deeper so that you can get to a place where you can share the gospel. And so instead of kind of going directly to the gospel, most of us need to move the conversation from the personal relational into personal spiritual. And to do that, you've got to ascertain whether they're willing to do that. And so you've got to bring up spiritual things. Now, maybe you can just say, hey, do you want to talk about Jesus? Or, hey, what do you think about Jesus? Or, hey, enough about you. Let's talk about Jesus. But those feel a little more abrupt and a little harsh. And so moving from their story to your story, and then moving to a place where Jesus addressed this problem of alcoholism or loneliness or depression or bankruptcy or suicidal thoughts or whatever the issue is that brought you to a place of need, then to say at that point, and Jesus solved that problem. Jesus gave me hope. Jesus gave me purpose. Jesus brought me into community. Jesus solved all of that. How did he do it? Yes, it was through salvation. It was through placing our faith in him. Those are the mechanisms. But right now, we're just looking at moving the conversation from them and us to them and us and Jesus. And so Jesus gets into the conversation in a natural way by moving our connection with them into our connection with Jesus because of this vulnerable issue of a problem. And Jesus solved it, and it is better at the end than the beginning. Now, it's not health and wealth and all my problems went away, but this particular issue was addressed. He does address issues in our life. Okay, I get it. It's not all, roses and puppies for the rest of our days. But when we came to him, he did in fact rescue us. He did help us, and we need to acknowledge that. People are looking to know, look, does this thing work? Not like, does it remove all the problems of my life, but is it real? What difference does it make? Or is it just a functional, religious, rote perfunctory thing that you do, or is he real in your life? Well, yeah, he's real in my life. This was what happened, and he came in and he addressed it. Paul talks about that. Paul says, look, I was zealous. I was locked into this religious identity. I thought you had to do all this stuff to make God happy. And I had this blinding light and I couldn't see. And it was the very person I was persecuting and trying to arrest and kill who actually had more power than me, knocked me off the horse and blinded me. And then he comes to me and he gives me my sight back. And then he gives me a job. He enlists me as a messenger for him. The mercy, the rescue is staggering. And now I get to actually be a herald. What a privilege. What an honor. In my situation, I actually had a great job and got fired from my job. And I had done everything I was supposed to do in my job. We were under budget. We had more staff than we'd ever had. We had more success than we'd ever had. And the boss came in and fired me. And I got knocked off my horse. I was blindsided. And I'm laying in the bed and I'm going, wait a minute, I did everything I was supposed to do, God, and I got fired. And I'm arguing with Jesus. Like, that's not how it's supposed to work. If you do what you're supposed to do, if I do what I'm supposed to do, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. That's part of the covenant, right? I kept my part of the covenant. I mean, I use religious, spiritual, reform language. And I'm sitting there again for like the 6th month in a row in the bed, arguing with Jesus. And I begin to say to him, how do I know you love me then? If I do what I was supposed to do, and I lost my job, what if I love my wife and she leaves me? What if I parent my daughters well and they leave me, or they die, or something happens to them? What if my friends turn their back? What if, how do I really know you love me? And it wasn't out of the blue. It just, oh yeah, there's no way to know unless you demonstrate it. How would you demonstrate it? It can't be any of these things. They could be taken away. The only reason I know that you love me is the cross. The greatest sacrifice, the rescue, you died for me. There's no greater proof that you love me than you died for me. Nobody can take that away. Nobody can change that. That's amazing. I didn't get my job back. I got another job. And looking back, I'm so glad I lost that job, because the period of ministry we entered into on the other side was more than we ever had planned to imagine. But Jesus rescued me. Now, my wife still hasn't left me. My daughters still haven't left me. But that's not how I know that God loves me. It's because of the cross. Now, that's an example of a 4-part story. That's not the only way to do it. In fact, I have several versions of my story, because depending on who I'm talking to, I will move into it from a place that connects with them. If I'm talking to students, I don't usually talk about where I got fired from my job. I usually talk about how I was double promoted at one point when we thought that was going to solve some behavior problems in school. So there's a lot of different ways to get into your story. Part of it's listening. Is that making sense? Okay. Think. Aha. I'm on time. So that's the story part. Now, how do we share the story in the listen, love, and lead structure we talked about last week? If we've shared our 4-part story, and we get to the end of that and we say, look, have you ever experienced that type of transition in your life? Have you ever experienced a problem that you didn't have an answer to, or have you ever encountered Jesus as he rescued you from a problem? There's a lot of ways to transition from that. But they're willing to have a spiritual conversation at that point. They have responded to your story. They're like, well, that's amazing. How did he help you? How did you connect with Jesus? How do you know it was him? Whatever the transition point is there, and there are a variety of ways to do that. But what is good news to the person then that you're trying to reach? And so one is they feel guilty and they want to be innocent or clean. And that's, again, you're listening to what is the issue in their life. If you have listened to them, you've shared, and you say, well, what is this? What is the large unfelt need in your life? Do you feel guilty? Is it a performance-driven thing? Then that's one possibility. Another possibility is that they feel weak, helpless, and they desire to feel powerful and in control. And so Jesus addresses that through his death on the cross as well. He who had all power, in fact, all authority in heaven and earth was given to him. And yet he became weak on our behalf. But we sing that song, let the weak say they are strong, because we become strong because he became weak. Literally had his hands nailed to a cross, like a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. And so in his weakness, we become strong. But increasingly, I think one of the primary places that we're engaging with people is their feeling shame or rejection, isolation, and their desire to feel honored, included, and welcomed. And so that sense of community and isolation is the bad news for which people are seeking good news. And so you can, and we've looked at the bridge diagram, I think maybe 4 weeks ago, we put up the version of the bridge diagram where we added some of the economic and social aspects of the fall and what the reversal of the fall through the cross means, not just spiritually, but also economically, socially, relationally. And that is an effective way of doing that. If you're comfortable with the bridge to life, adding those pieces there helps build connections with some of those conflict issues that people would engage with us and share about. But we have we used in Asia a tool that I find is increasingly effective here in the US context as well. And so we do it as we call it the Harmony Circle, the Return to Harmony Circle. And so so on a napkin, in a McDonald's or Hardee's or whatnot, you could do this over your kitchen table on a paper towel, but you draw the circle. And you can use the word harmony, you can use the word peace, you can use the word shalom. There's a perfection, there's a lot of ways you can do that, but we like to use the word harmony. When God made the world, he made it in harmony. He made us to be in harmony with him, and we were in harmony with him. He made us to have harmony with ourselves. And Adam and Eve had perfect peace in their own hearts and lives with themselves. He made us to have harmony with one another. Adam and Eve had no conflict, no angst, no shame, no rejection, no fear between them. In fact, he made us to have harmony with the world. He put us in a garden. The animals were named by us, that we were living in sustenance from the land, and the land was at peace as we cared for it. So whether it's man in nature, man to self, or man to God, there was perfect harmony. That's the way it was intended to be, and that's the way God made it. But imperfection came in. Imperfection did not come from God, but it came from us because we rejected God, because we were not content with harmony. We thought there was a better way. And so as we rejected his harmony, instead, imperfection came in, and that led to separation between man and God, separation between man and man, separation between man and nature, and separation between man and self. Those internal thoughts that we have that accuse come from the evil one and the enemy, but that we ourselves are discontent and dissatisfied in and ourselves with who we are. Separation and disharmony. Those are the results of the imperfection. Again, this came from us. And so what we're needing is perfection. To make everything right, to get it back on the rails, we need perfection. But if it's a closed system, if all of us have been tainted by the imperfection and now separation and disharmony, then the next generation that's born is also separated and in disharmony. And so children to parents as the byproduct of man to man, and still man to self, and man to nature, and man to God. And so we need perfection, because only perfection can restore unity and return us to harmony. But if you can't do it because you're already imperfect and broken and separated, and you can't do it because you're broken and separated, and I know I'm broken and separated, where can we get the perfection? It can't be from education. All the teachers themselves are imperfect. It can't be an economic model, because we're already dealing with limitations of structure and finance, broken systems, broken ideas from broken and separated people. So it's got to come from the outside. And so God steps in again. God enters into the broken system. He brings perfection from outside the system into the system in the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus exchanges his perfection for our imperfection. He exchanges his unity with God, his unity with man, his unity with nature, his unity with himself for our separation. And he restores harmony. He gives us his harmony for our disharmony. It's better at the end than it is at the beginning. There's a rescuer who has come. And it's only through the cross. How did the cross do that? He who had perfect harmony with God said, my God, why have you forsaken and abandoned me? Why did he do that? So that we might have a relationship where God says, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will be with you always, even to the very end of time or the end of the age. He who had unity with God, he gave it up, became a man, and died. So that is an example. This is not a silver bullet. Please don't misunderstand. This is not better than the Bridge to Life. It's just another version. And part of my hope here is to help you recognize that there are other ways to engage people that highlight or emphasize. Really, what we're looking for is what's the issue in their life? What's that conflict point? Where is Jesus putting his finger, bringing them to a place of I hate to say desperation, but a place of humility, a place of willingness to say, I can't do this on my own. I need help. Increasingly, we turn to the government for help, or we turn to our neighbors for help, or we'll turn to our parents or family for help. But even they are inadequate. They let us down. And so it's only when we turn to God that God, if you can help me, I need help. How does he do that? He does it in the person and the presence and the promises of Jesus. And so as we bring people to Jesus, he addresses that problem, but so much more. All right, I think that's where we should start to land the plane there. When I lived, I had a friend who was involved in ministry training and I want to be real careful about details here, but in the part of his training, he would go in and the church would ask him if he would come, and he would say yes. So he'd show up. In the very first week, the people in the church who came, he would have them write their 4-part story. He had them write it down because if you try to do it in your head, it sounds different in your head than when you write it down. So he had them write it down, and then they would have to read it out loud 5 times in the training room, all simultaneously. So you got this cacophony of noise as they're reading their story. And then he would say to them, next week, before you come back, share your story just like that with 5 people who don't know Jesus. And so they would do that. The next week they'd come for round 2. And when they would get there, he would say, did you share your story 5 times? And they would say, no. And he would say, okay, well, you can't come. You're not allowed in. And it's what? I said, what? If you didn't do what we said last week, why am I going to let you come in this week? It builds on last week. So do what we said last week, and then you come back. Oh, okay, so they had to leave. And did you share 5 times? Did you say your story 5 times? Yes. Okay, come on in. So those who did what he told them to do would come in. Those who didn't, another week to do it. So the second week, he would say, all right, now what I want you to do is I want you to take this Bible study. They went through the Bible study together. So now go find those 5 people. How many of them gave their life to Christ? You say, well, 3 or 2 or 1. Okay. I want you to go back to all 5 and do this study. So even the ones who didn't make a decision to follow Christ? Yes. Why would they do that? Well, because they're children of God. They're just the children of God in a broken relationship versus children of God with a restored relationship. So the first lesson is on assurance. And so you even tell the ones who have a broken relationship, you go through the assurance lesson so that they're assured that they're broken, which is a way of helping them go, holy smokes, I don't want to be broken. I'd like to be restored. So it's a reverse evangelism technique. Meanwhile, you're doing follow-up, and his goal is to equip them to be able to do follow-up. So they go out and do that. Every week, get to the door. Did you do what I told you to do last week? Yes or no? If it's no, you're not allowed in until you do what you're supposed to do. Now, I sat through this training in Hong Kong with a group of missionaries from another denomination, another organization that I don't want to mention. And many of the people in the room had been missionaries a lot longer than I had. And so when he began to say what he was doing, they said, what happened? He said, oh, they do it. He said, well, yeah, they do it. And the fruit of it is phenomenal. It is staggering, some of the numerical, now the context in which they were, the number of non-believers around them, the fact that many of them had never been exposed to the good news, and as they heard it for the first time, they received it with great joy. And when they said, what should we do? Write your story, tell it to 5 people. So they began to reproduce what they were taught. And so the growth was pretty remarkable. So these missionaries in the room would say to the trainer, what did you say to him? He said, I told him to go do it. They said, but what did you say? He said, I told him to go do it. They said, in Chinese, what did you say? So he would say in Chinese, 我叫你耶稣说什么? 所以你需要听他的话. So, and which means, I told you what Jesus said. You must certainly go and do it. And all the missionaries were like, that doesn't work. You can't, what? No, that wouldn't work. And the guy's like, I don't know what to tell you. That's what I tell them, and they do it, and it works. Now, I'm really clear here. This is Sunday school class in 13 weeks in a quarter. I get to talk 30 minutes. It's not life on life equipment. I understand that. But I want to leave you this quarter with this. I do believe I told you what Jesus said. You can certainly go and do it. As must I. It's not an accusatory statement. He left us here to make disciples. We're not waiting for the victory. Gathering people for the victory. So, I told you what Jesus said. Go and do it. Merry Christmas. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I don't know why we're so scared of that. Father, even as we were reminded this morning, it's not a great season to launch into this. It's just so many opportunities to engage people because we celebrate the arrival this month. Father, we do pray for Laura's daughters. I pray for the conversation with them. I pray that there would be opportunities to engage about identity, community, mission, about freedom from guilt, inclusion and welcome, acceptance and honor from God, power, and removal of weakness and helplessness because of Jesus. But not only for Laura and her daughters, but for each of us, those that we have been praying for throughout this quarter, others that we haven't even met yet, who are going to come across our path, those that we need to go across the fence or across the street, across the hall, across the cubicle. I pray for listening ears to their stories, the grace to tell our stories with humility and an invitation to change the end of their story. Father, would you be at work? Would you give us the privilege to see? In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. You're welcome. So we send out a newsletter once a month. If you'd like to be on our mailing list, if you'll send me an email, I'm happy to add you. It's not obligatory in any way, shape, or form. Usually it's once a month. Here in December, we're doing once a week, just at the end of the year. But you're welcome to do that. Would love to keep up with you. And thank you guys very much. This has been a huge quarter for our family. You have blessed us beyond your ability to know. So thank you for allowing us to be part of your class.